Welcome to a deep dive of Don't Let the Old Man In, a series where we release 3 episodes a week for 3 weeks over December and January, highlights of the previous series. Enjoy. I've heard you say healthy aging isn't something that starts in your 60s or 70s. It starts much earlier. It's a lifelong process, and you distinguish between lifespan and health span. So for those of us who are vaguely familiar with those terms, tell us what they are and what is the difference.
Okay, so lifespan, I think most people understand. It's the number of years, and we often talk about expected lifespan, which is an average and often represented at a national level. So it's the number of years lived in a life. Health span is the number of years lived in a life in good health or with the absence of disease or infirmity.
So good health is defined as the absence of.
And one of the things that we've got much better at I'm speaking sort of more globally now, and the medical community's got much better at, is prolonging lifespan. So we're now living a lot longer than we were 50, 100 years ago. But one of the things that's not happening is there's a gap. There's a gap between lifespan and the number of years lived without illness or disease. And so this issue, a lot of work that's being done in the space at the moment is about closing that gap. Yeah.
Michael Bungay Senior, originally from Canberra, originally from Canberra, now in Canada, was here a few weeks ago, and he made a comment that your last decade is pretty crap. So your job now is to start training for it.
Yeah.
I.e. close the gap between health span and lifespan, make sure it's relatively similar.
I think that's a super astute observation. I think that's fantastic. And it's true. I think that one of the things that I've been really struck by, and there were many things that I sort of grabbed onto when I was doing my exercise science degree. And I remember a chart that head of program once put up, which showed world record times for swimming and running across 5-year increments across a lifespan. And so we're talking about elite level performance at this point, but that's fine. What we see is that, of course, as people get older, those times decrease. People get slower and slower. It's quite gradual. Where it doesn't really go south and fall off a cliff until you reach about the age of 70.
Right.
And I find that it really struck me when I saw this graph that, I think people often get undone by negative age stereotypes that form for them around what their capability based on their chronological age. So I'm 40, I'm 45, I'm 50, which means I can't do X, Y, and Z. Whereas if you look at the sports science and exercise science data, what you see is that people are actually sitting on a lot of physical capacity that I think goes unutilized by virtue of the fact that these negative age stereotypes, upset the apple cart and disincline them to do things.
So you're saying that data is people are able to maintain their capacity for swimming at a particular
50s,
pace
60s.
The whole way through, and then it starts slowing down at 70.
And so to Michael's point that, you're training for that last decade, I absolutely get that. And one of the things that comes to my mind is that graph, that reality that even into 50s and 60s, people can still perform and physically perform at quite good high levels. And that there will be a natural decline that comes with that. But I think, to his point, the extent to which you're able to prepare for that will allow you to be able to have a relatively comfortable and enjoyable later life based on the payoff of what you've put into that point. And I did a presentation at a conference last year which I called "Physical Activity as Social Glue," and I think that community aspect is something that really bonds people to their physical pursuits in really, really important ways. And so I know you mentioned the first book, but the second book, 26 Ways to Keep Moving, when you look at all of those chapters that we wrote, and we wrote 26, 27 narratives of people who loved their physical pursuit and why and all of that, when you look at all 27 of those, the common thread is, I love this thing I do, and the community aspect of it is one of the greatest parts of it.
And I think for certainly for myself, but I'm not unique in this. A lot of folks who are 40s, 50s, 60s, life can get in the way. You know,
Of course.
your 40s is a
Yep.
prime time for career.
Yep.
Your kids, if you're having kids, are typically kind of 5 to 15. This prime time for parenting. The notion of physical exercise often drops away, or at least drops away from the intensity or maintenance level that it used to be. And then some of us go, I'll take up running, I'll take up jogging by myself, which is perfectly fine. But then you get injured and there's no one there to pull you back in. And what I've discovered for me, having done is it 3 half marathons and each time swore I'd never do one again because I hated the process.
Yeah.
Right. And found myself, I'll train for a half marathon, then do nothing for 2 years, then train for another half marathon, do nothing for 2 years because there was no ecosystem around me and I hadn't engaged in any ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I've discovered now, and this is why that part of your book really struck me, is that connection part is actually more important, which is probably why those of us who ever do any kind of cycling, men in Lycra cycling, the coffee shop
100%.
catch up is the most important part of the cycle.
Yeah, that's right. And people like to, sort of characterize that stuff and sort of mock it and laugh at it and all that. I tell you what, there's a lot of power in it and a lot of value. And I think that social bonding part of this is important because it is the thing that can get you out of bed, when it's pretty crappy outside or what, are you feeling a bit tired, but you got someone who's outside in the car waiting for you, or you don't want to let them down or whatever. Sometimes that's all you need. And when you're out there and you're doing it, you kind of go, oh, God, I'm bloody pleased I'm doing this. Thanks very much. That's an important component of the scaffold that can allow us to continue this on. I think it comes back down to this issue of questioning some of the stereotypes that we hold around age. I think the issue of self-directed ageism is a real trap that we can get caught in this conversation that we have with ourselves about what we're not capable of doing based on our age. And I think there needs to be we need to bring that out into the light and have a serious, hard look at it. Because I think we're limited only by our imagination and the possibilities that we're prepared to entertain. So it would be around that. To keep on thinking in ways that are loaded with possibilities and enthusiasm for things, and again grounded in the things that we're interested in and we care about.
In your book, Get Moving, Keep Moving, which kind of came out of that study that you did, you identified a 4-stage health activation type process, which when I read it, I went, oh, right, I get the connection. It was on the same time as this guy, James, was talking to me. Reflect, project, inspect, and then connect.
Yep.
Talk us through those 4 stages and why you figured out this is part of the missing piece.
Yeah. So, again, this model was sort of born on the roads and the trails of the Central Coast whilst I was running. So I did a lot of this processing while I was running. And one of the things I think I've always been struck by is how intrinsically motivating, I think, physical activity is for human beings. We are active creatures. We come into the world in a very active way. If you observe kids in a playground, 4, 5, 6, you'll see them running, twisting, pulling, shoving, doing things that develop speed and dexterity and problem solving and all of those resources that are so important for being able to live. And kids rarely require any sorts of rewards or bribes or inducements to play. They will just do it. Yeah. So there's an intrinsic nature to our desire to move, and I've always been struck by that. I strongly believe that we all have that is something that is inbuilt into us. Now, what happens, I think, is that sometimes from a very early age we can part company with that natural impulse for a variety of reasons, right? Can be the way in which we're engaged with at school, being picked last for sporting teams, parental pressure, hyper competitiveness. There's a bunch of things I think that lead to separate people from the natural inclinations that they have. I'm telling you all this because it makes sense of the reflect component, right? So with reflect, the encouragement is for people to reflect back into those earliest stages of life when they're most likely or more likely to have had an intrinsic connection and interest in physical activity of one form or another, and to pull at that, to try and surface some memories of enjoyable, satisfying, exciting physical activity and put it out into the light and have a look at that. And I've recently done a study using a process called guided autobiography, where I got a group of midlife adults to do exactly that. It was really, really interesting.
So guided autobiography means you're guiding them to think about their life story in specific parts for specific things.
Yeah, in time increments, first 25 years, just thinking about physical activity and sport in a very broad sense. So yes, a lot of people get involved in sport, but it's often the very limited way in which they think about these things, right? I'm getting people to think about not just the organised sport you're involved in, but the riding bikes with your friends, the paper round that you used to do, the lawn mowing job, all of the physical stuff that you did in the first 25 years. Let's bring that to the surface and wonder about it. So a supported process, reflective process, getting people to think deeply about that and also to engage in some reminiscence around it, using keepsakes and memorabilia to try and bring some of those memories to life. So this is what I got this group to do, about 20 students to do. It was really, really interesting. And all sorts of things emerged out of that, but one of the most significant things was people just forgetting what they used to do and what they used to enjoy.
Yeah.
But people also forgetting how those things were reflective of important aspects of their identity, who they felt they were, and who they still feel that they are. However, some of that's got lost.
So I used to be a great oarsman or fencer or footballer or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. And also, you know, the hidden or lost or disconnected sides of identity, but also the ones that are still most prominent. So I remember one participant reflecting that I was hyper competitive as a kid, and that's one of the reasons why actually, you know, I had a little bit of a tension around my relationship with physical activity. And what I've noticed, actually, I hadn't realized I'm still like that now.
Right.
And that's not actually always super helpful for me. So it was throwing up some really interesting stuff, but also most prominently was this sense of I loved it then, I could still love it now. And I think I would like to revisit some of this.
You tell a story about a gentleman who, through your help or through reading your stuff, discovered a new joy in fencing. Isn't that right?
My favourite story, Eddie. Yeah.
Tell us about Eddie.
So Riley, my son, and I rewrote the second book, 26 Ways, and it involved us interviewing, you know, we went through the alphabet and we interviewed 27 different people who had different interests in physical pursuits. We got to F, and I'd always had this fascination with fencing. It's a 1 in every 4 years fascination with fencing, because every time the Olympics rolls around, you know, you overdose. You overdose on certain sports, and I overdosed a bit on fencing. So I thought, let's do fencing. So I didn't know anybody who was a fencer. Cast about for some contacts. Managed to find a guy at the PCYC in Newcastle. His name was Eddie. And this was during COVID time, so we did this via Zoom. And so we interviewed Eddie, and Eddie was a really interesting case. He was 60 at the time we interviewed him, and for the first 50 years of Eddie's life, he had very, very little engagement, physical activity and sport at all. In fact, he would describe himself, he came from a family that he described as being anti-sport. So no encouragement to get involved in sport at all. Quite a light guy, got bullied a fair bit at school. He so he didn't do any of that, but he threw himself into academics and music. So he was a multi-instrumentalist and, really talented fella. When he was 50, he had two teenage boys, both on the spectrum, and his GP at one consultation said, you need to find something for these boys to do. They need to burn off some energy. And so he had the conversation with his boys. What would you like to do, boys? They had a bit of a chat about it. One of the boys said, I know, Dad, I would like to do sword fighting, fencing. And so Eddie's going, oh, righto, okay. He knew nothing about it. He checked it all out. He found a local fencing club. And so he went along for about 12 months and would stand off the piste, which is where they do the fencing, watching his sons learn how to sword fight. One night, this was about 12 months in, he started to get a little bit more curious. He was paying attention to what was going on around him and thought he would give it a try. It took him 12 months to do it, but he thought he'd give it a try.
So he's going every week.
He's going every
with
week,
his sons, watching.
That's it. And he went over, and the first thing he noticed when he picked up the foil was how light it was, 500 grams. Now, this is a guy who was quite slight. He had some sort of hang-ups about his strength or his lack of strength. First thing he noticed was, this is light. He then started to do a little thrust and parry. He quite enjoyed that, managed to land a few hits and thought, it's interesting. I seem to be able to do this.
Okay.
Trying it that night led to then getting a little bit involved, to then getting a lot involved. And so in a very short space of time, he went from not fencing to engaging in going along to fencing nights, to being coached, to then starting to engage in competitions. Further on in his journey, he then started to become an organizer of tournaments. He then became the president of the fencing club. He then took it upon himself to learn all about the strategy and the history of the sport. He became a nut for fencing.
Right.
And he lives and breathes fencing. And I love the story because he gets an enormous amount of satisfaction out of competing and also running events and the club. But the thing I love about it is that he is a guy that if I had interviewed him 20 years earlier, he would have probably said, I'm not a sporty person at all.
Yeah.
Yet he had these inclinations. He just didn't know he had these inclinations, right? And he found them by accident.
And I think that's a really important message and a learning for lots of us is, a lot of us think, hey, I'm now 50. I'm on the second half and it's kind of a slow progress. About what you're telling us. And indeed, the common theme of every episode in this show is reinventing yourself in your second half is actually quite easy. You've got to figure out what it is and put some effort into it. But the benefit is phenomenal if you do so. I hope you enjoy that. Please feel free to subscribe, hit like, hit follow, whatever button's on your screen. We'd love if you sent this episode to a friend of yours. And in the meantime, don't let the old man in.